Hi, Omar. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So before we start the show, I want to give you a shout out on like your own LinkedIn series, and you should totally plug it here because it's amazing. It's with Mike Maples from Floodgate, and then another amazing lawyer, Gary, and I forgot his firm's name. Sorry, like I'm not like a lawyer expert, but yeah, it seems like amazing show.
Thank you. Yeah, Gary Hood, the Chief Legal Officer of Duracell, and now the Chief AI Officer as well.
I love that. I love people's title just like change to everything AI. To start with, so I guess like for the audience who may it's their first time to know you, I want to give the audience a little rundown of your kind of like journey. So you started your career at Wilson Sonsini, and you have worked at Oric, like all these like top law firms, and then you have founded a few companies that got acquired before founding Udia. Maybe we could talk about like what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career, kind of shaping into who you are today.
Yeah, definitely. So my first startup was basically my chance to make every mistake you can make, I would say. And probably the number one category of mistakes was around not listening enough to the customer or the user. And it's like very cliche at this point, but I think it was just very painful for me because I didn't take this very lucrative job to go to a law firm and instead moved in with four engineers in an apartment in Brooklyn for a couple of years. and and literally all we did was like code and sell and occasionally play basketball. Like that was like the only thing we also did that was not work related. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend anyone to do that. But I think the probably biggest learning was we pivoted from being a product where we were the user to then like a middle-aged woman being the user, and we were a bunch of like dudes under the age of probably 25 at that point. And so we just made a lot of like kind of logical decisions that were totally disconnected from the realities of the person that we were actually building our tech for. And then after a lot of building, then suddenly no one's actually really using the features that we built, and that was pretty painful. So actually my second startup, I interviewed 200 customers before writing a single line of code, went to
Wow.
like extreme, and was just determined not to make that one mistake. And that really worked well because by the time we did build the product, we were profitable within the first quarter. And it was very much like super niche, but we kind of solved a real problem, which was a good feeling.
Wow, like you obviously had, I mean, I was listening to your podcast, and obviously, like, I feel like you're such a great interviewers for the people as well. We have overlapping questions, but okay, so I wonder, okay, maybe we'll start with like, what would you ask the 200 people, and then like, what's their kind of like intel to like kind of like chat with you as well? What I'm sure, like, what are you trying to get out of it? Like, how do you frame the question to make them feel like they want to kind of like contribute?
Yeah, well, and it's definitely evolved. Like I would say, there are some great like back when I was doing this. This is again startup number two. I'm now in startup number three. So what I was just referring to was actually a few years ago, and there's
Tech
been some
you.
great yeah, and there's been some great books like the Mom Test, which I think goes really deep into kind of how to ask these questions and all of that, to make sure you're not biasing. Like the whole premise of that book, I totally agree with, which is that unfortunately people will lie to you, and everybody's like not even lying consciously, but we all like the idea of our friend starting some company or some charismatic founder hopefully doing something cool, and so we all want to support it and say, yeah, that sounds amazing. Like, and you kind of give some feedback where you're saying things like it sounds amazing, and then it gives that founder a lot of false confidence that they're actually onto something, when if you actually said, great, here's like a sign up, can you upload your credit card and we're going to charge you $1,000 a month, then suddenly they have a very different reaction. So I think like that whole book is around, I think, going a lot deeper into that. I think what I've now found, just to maybe jump ahead a little bit to how are we asking the questions now, or what did we do with Udia to get some success early on. um, it's really like, to me, there's sort of two categories of questions. I think one of them is around, like, one thing that I've learned about enterprise software and just selling kind of in general, particularly large deals to highly sophisticated buyers, which I would say has been my main sweet spot, or at least as a company, we've kind of gone to the extreme end of like Fortune 500 companies, and we're selling to the C suite in many cases. I think there's kind of two types of maybe categories of questions that I generally focus on. One is around, the reality is any major purchase, especially, is a very emotional decision, right? And even as a
Mhm.
consumer, like if I want to buy a Ferrari, um, I might tell my wife it's because it can go from 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds, but that's not actually why. There's obviously maybe I wanna look cool, I wanna feel cool, like, whatever it is, right? But there is some emotional hook, and then kind of the rationalization for that emotion is that it goes 0 to 60 in 2.8, and that's how I justify paying a lot of money for it. With B2B, I would say in enterprise software, it's the same, where kind of, you need to understand what's the emotional hook for your buyer. So one category of questions, which I can get into if you're interested, is around like how do you actually figure out why fundamentally, emotionally, they would ever want to buy from you? And then the second part is, okay, great. I now have an understanding of that. What is my 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds? Like, what is the rationalization for the emotion? And that's where a lot of the questions that I ask are more geared around, what are the outcomes they're actually trying to achieve? If they weren't going to buy this software, how would they go about doing it today? Really paying attention to like, oh, I would have to hire 3 people. I'd have to use a law firm. I'd have to do kind of XYZ. And you start mapping everything to like, okay, this isn't just emotionally exciting. It's actually, we can not only tap into the emotional part, but also help you see that this is going to drive $9.8 million in top line revenue for you, or kind of whatever the rationalization is for the emotion.
For sure. I have so many questions there. So like one is like, okay, maybe we could talk about like how you pick the sector, right? So I feel like Udia is like in such a lucrative sector, which is like the legal arena. So I think there's like like I see two side of innovation. One is like, um, to like I guess like to replace a lawyer, which is a kind of like category you guys are on. And then the other part is like assisting lawyer like Laura or whatever. And like not whatever. It's like Laura, it's like former guest on our show as well, the founders. And like so that's one's like obviously everybody raised a lot of money. And there's like you guys and Harvey, GCL, like all these other category of people that are doing the innovation in the lawyer work itself. I guess like how do you see like why do you bet on this group of people versus like the other group?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll take it in reverse order and just talk about, because I think one thing about Udia is we're actually quite different. It's not always like most people either love us or hate us. I would say there's not many who kind of like us or can't tell how we're different than Harvey or GCAI or other folks. And I think the foundational difference really comes down to we've just been of the mindset that since we see AI as the future of labor, not the future of software, and 95 to 98% of our customer, the chief legal officer's budget goes to humans, not software. The opportunity that we're focused on from day one has basically been how do we actually offer a 10x better alternative to how that 98% of the budget is being spent today. And I would say the other companies you mentioned are mostly fighting for the 2% and trying to be the AI software provider and selling seats. Like it all comes down to like also the business model of if you're selling seats and just licenses of your software, you are probably fighting the good fight to try to change lawyers' behavior and get them to adopt software and all of that, which I actually think is a pretty hard thing to do, but it's actually starting to happen in some really exciting ways. Udia, in contrast, though, I would say we're not selling hours like a law firm or selling seats like a Harvey. We're actually selling outcomes. And the outcomes that we sell are measurable business outcomes along the lines of I want to reduce my outside counsel bill by 20%. I want to eliminate 90% of contract review. I want to shift the turnaround time from how quickly I can get a deal back to the business from an average of 4.8 days to 1.8 days. Like really, really like kind of hard outcomes. And ultimately, we take on the risk of the AI not working, right? But in order to deliver the outcome, we have to basically have this data and AI platform, and also typically some amount of forward deployed engineers, and at times forward deployed lawyers to be able to kind of make that happen.
For sure. I wanna, I guess, like, start with like, you mentioned about like, so there is like, um, like the measurable business outcomes for these like law firms, like since like I feel like they are billing out of like hourly basis, that's like the traditional style, that which is the one that you guys are kind of like trying to kill. And I wonder, so what if like I fail at like arguing at a court with so and so, like am I still gonna get money from my clients? Or the other day I was like chatting with a lawyer, like basically she was saying that like they were serving a really giant clients that's like raised until like maybe series D or after it's about their IPO, but like eventually it was like they filed bankruptcy, but for the lawyer I'm sure it's still like very successful, even for the VCs as well. Like I wonder, how do you think about I guess like the measurable business outcome, like what is a successful outcome?
Yeah, so we don't sell to law firms, so we only sell to enterprises. So kind of the in-house legal team or the general counsel who's hiring the lawyer or hiring the law firm would be our customer, and that's where I think we don't have any conflict of interest or need to make sure that the law firm still preserves its profit margin or generates a lot of revenue. And in fact, that's part of the motivation for our customers is that, like, one of them came to me recently and was really excited because he had gotten approval to give his team a 3% salary increase. And then they worked out the numbers, and the law firms had all been charging them 18% increases year over year for the last 3 years.
Wow.
And it was just like a bit frustrating because like these same law firms are putting out press releases saying they're adopting AI, but none of that value seems to come back in the form of any kind of cost savings to the customer. So we've kind of squarely only operated on the buyer of legal services side, not selling to the sellers of legal services, right? So that we can just have complete aligned incentives around not feeling bad about saving a lot of money on legal fees for our customers. Like that's one of the value drivers, right? I would say. Um, I think the question's more. Well, yeah, maybe I'll pause there. Does that help answer the?
Yeah, for sure. Can we talk about the product and sales journey? If you want to do a product demo, you can do it here as well if you click present.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm on sort of a weird computer right now, so I might not be able to pull the demo at the moment, but I think you
I can
actually.
open the website for you.
What's that?
I can open the website for you.
Yeah. But the I mean, I can just talk through the product and obviously invite people to check out some of the stuff on the website. But yeah, you can see the outcomes messaging is very prominent. The idea behind our platform and really the motivation behind it is if you want to actually think about the 98% of the budget going to where humans actually spend their time across these examples that you see here, right? Contracting, compliance, M&A, like a lot of these areas where humans spend a lot of time. We really first in the beginning spent a lot of time again listening and just really going deep into like how are these humans, like where does their time actually go? And we found that there was actually a fairly shared set of activities around like whether it was compliance, M&A, litigation, IP. They're basically spending a lot of time summarizing, extracting, drafting, doing risk assessments. And even though a compliance risk assessment is different than a contract risk assessment, there's also a lot of shared properties. So we basically built kind of agents that can do all these things, right? And none of them can do them as well as a SME who's been doing this for 20 years at a company. But we kind of then asked ourselves, like, why can't they do it as well as the human who's very, very well trained? And we actually learned that, like, one big part of this is every AI problem is actually a data problem, right? And so if you look at like this example here, it actually is really about like to solve some of these problems, we actually had to use like computer vision models if it's something like this where it's handwritten text or signatures and contracts. And even the state of the art on the foundation model side has some limitations. Of course, from an accuracy standpoint, there's also a lot of challenges. But we basically realized that like when you think about what is the real data problem, it's not just the obvious stuff like this, because ultimately that's fairly straightforward from a tech perspective to pull together a bunch of these different technologies, right, to be able to solve the problem. But the part that I think is the most interesting is that the knowledge that a human or AI needs to be able to do not just like an okay job, but like as good of a job as like the world's best lawyer is actually locked in people's heads. And that's really where we found like the most opportunity is by spending a lot of time at pretty senior levels of the lawyers that we work with at our customer. We're basically downloading the brain of these human experts and all this undocumented knowledge. We've developed a lot of mechanisms to actually really kind of extract and kind of turn that into something that is documented, not just by like a set of rules, but actually going a little bit deeper into like what are the principles behind the rule, right? And I can kind of make like maybe bring that to life with some examples, but maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah, for sure. Since like this is like basically turning unstructured data to structured data, and like what would be you say like it's like the core technology mode for this product, or do you feel like it's like insight mode or distribution mode, which is like I'm sure you have all the modes, but like maybe
Yeah. I mean, I think the moat that's the most interesting was the one that I was getting at. I mean, I think there's really two parts of it. One is around the um the knowledge, the undocumented knowledge in the mind of an expert. I really do feel because it's quite painful to actually extract that. First
Mhm.
of all, to even have access to that person, and then to actually extract it in the right way. And what I found is like what's really interesting about like a data moat is it sounds cool and theoretically we could get every document that a customer has or every contract they have. That's actually less valuable in my mind than actually getting, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Chief Legal Officer, you have 600 lawyers who are like actually the four that you like absolutely can't live without because they have the best judgment and discernment of how to solve edge cases, how to like really like you trust their intuition because they've seen so many things. And so first of all, just even knowing like who those four people are makes a big difference because if it's 4 out of 600, we're not going to waste time with 596 of them, right? And then once you have the four, like really kind of initially with maybe even some manual, like doing an interview with them and that kind of thing. But then over time, like baking a lot of mechanisms into the product to capture a lot of implicit and explicit feedback from them has actually been the biggest moat because ultimately there's a lot of like non-obvious things. Like I think one of the examples that if you tuned in yesterday is like there's like 1,000 legal AI companies saying that we have the best redlining tool, right? Because like a lot of what lawyers do is redlining. In other words, I take some kind of document and basically assess the risk of it and then propose mitigations to the risk, which are called red lines, right? Where I'm basically saying, hey, I wouldn't use this language or we can't agree to $10 million limitation of liability or whatever it is. And then they kind of make a change called a red line, which is basically their proposed mitigation to the risk.
Mhm.
What I find really interesting is like the whole status quo of like seemingly endless layers of lawyers adding more and more red lines, sending it to the other side. They have their red lines. You go back and forth. Meanwhile, weeks are going on that this deal is not getting done. And if you're like a CEO or a business leader and you just want to close more deals, it's
Mhm.
very frustrating. You're kind of like, what's going on? And then eventually, a very senior lawyer, usually at the pressure of the business, steps in and is like, uh, hey, what's actually happening here? And then they're like, oh, we're fighting over these three things. And they kind of just resolve it very, very quickly by actually just deciding this is a risk we can live with. This is one that doesn't matter, right? And so a lot of what we're doing is like trying to jump to that outcome much faster, not by just building a toy that helps them redline a little bit faster, but by actually getting the more senior expert to say, you know what, the principle here is if this is like a highly strategic customer, the probability of a dispute is like less than 2% over this term. And we've never won the last 9 times we tried to push for limitation of liability of 10 million. We never got that. Like that's all data that our platform can provide and they can then actually say at the more senior level, please just sign every deal that looks like this without even having anybody redline it, right?
Mhm. Oh, okay. But I have so many questions on this too. So like you mentioned like, about like first of all like the thing is like to get the best judgment of like each firm and stuff. So is actual like the corporate counsel like let's call it like the OpenAI legal team. Is there like actually 600 people and then there's like only 4 people that's like living up like I mean I like your philosophy. You said this on a different podcast too, which is like only 20% of people doing like 80% of work and like we need to find like the experts basically that's like the moral of the thing. But first of all like how big are those like legal team that you're selling to, let's call it like THL or something, like DHL, like you know, a logistic company, like how many lawyers are actually there? Like how many people are actually still suing DHL every day to like, you know, to have like 600 lawyers? Is that actually like an actual number or like
Yeah. I mean, it is, and I won't maybe comment on any one customer,
yeah, don't come on any
but
customer.
I think in general, at the Fortune 500 level, where we primarily, kind of work with customers in that league, I would say it's not uncommon to have hundreds of people on the legal team.
Mhm.
And the precise number, I mean, 600 is at the higher end, to be fair. I'd say it's more like maybe the top 50 to 100 companies are probably at that level where there's hundreds of lawyers. But I think the proportion, like, I actually don't think it's the 80-20 rule. I think it's like the 98-2 or 99-1 rule. And that's actually where there's a really fascinating opportunity, because ultimately there's really a relatively small number of SMEs who have like incredibly good judgment and really have this ability to actually totally leapfrog and make many of these processes completely irrelevant or unnecessary if you can arm them with the right technology.
Right. Okay. So how much like budget are people? Oh my God, who's coming? Okay, let me shut this down. Sorry. So I guess like okay, let's like I want to think backwards on like, you know, how you're like selling to the enterprise clients, right? Like for example, like a DHL, like do you have to be like BFF with like, you know, all the like, you know, core judges or whatever? And then is there like a legal association? Obviously everybody go to the legal conference, all the legal tech people go to the tech conference, but like how do you kind of like onboard all these like, you know, Fortune 500 companies and also like since I feel like from my observation, you started with the traditional companies in general than like, you know, Google or something. So like what's your thought process on like, you know, the customer acquisition or like who is your ideal target these days?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on the second question, I would say there's a lot of customers, like 80 or so, that are not on our website that we maybe haven't received the rights or whatnot to talk about publicly. But I would say it's much broader than just the like extremely large, more kind of non-tech companies. We have a growing set of technology companies as well as customers, and it's not even just the Fortune 500 anymore. We actually do have a lot of kind of I wouldn't say like startups or anything, but definitely more
Enterprise.
future Fortune 500 companies, we call them, right? So who are like the very fast growing technology companies that are kind of in their current growth rates will be at that Fortune 500 level in the next few years, right?
Right.
So we have a broader set of customers. I think in terms of how we engage, right? I think this approach of selling outcomes is something that, when you combine that with the fact that we actually have we completed the acquisition of a service provider, we launched a law firm, and the reason that we did that was actually largely, I mean, one of the reasons that it really simplifies and reduces a lot of friction for any of our customers to work with us, because the buying process to engage a law firm or a services company is actually very different and much easier than for them to engage with the technology company. There's just like one of those weird nuances of like this particular part of the market, right? But it's actually like it doesn't necessarily make a ton of logical sense. But we've just been thinking about how do we make it easy for our customer to work with us, right? And the truth is, it's easier for them to work with a law firm than it is with a tech company, when 98% of their budget historically has gone to law firm like companies, not technology like companies. And I think with AI, there's legitimately, I mean, especially if you have a forward deployed engineering model and human in the loop to drive outcomes, you could classify it as either services or software. We internally don't consider ourselves a services company, and if you look at our gross margins, you'd probably agree. But we whenever it's convenient for someone to call us a services company, especially a customer, then we're totally on board with that.
For sure. I wonder, so what is how do you decide on like maybe we could talk about the go-to market a little bit. So like since you identify as like these like fast growing future Fortune 500 companies, um like are you since you were like lawyer by training, were you already like kind of like BFF with I'm sure like you know obviously you have worked at like some of the most like you know amazing legal practices before. So like I mean, I don't know if you stay in touch with them for like 15 years ago that like, you know, now they're like hat lawyer at blah blah, blah firm. Or how do you basically land these clients these days?
Yeah, so I think both with Text IQ and with Udia, probably 80 to 90% of our initial customers all came from cold emails that I wrote, and I had no prior connection. And even though you would think, oh, Text IQ, I must have had a lot of overlap. And this is where like the 15% that's true. But I think we weren't selling at the chief legal officer level with Text IQ. We were mostly selling at like 2 levels down, and it was a very niche product. So there was like a world of people that were very much kind of making decisions about technology companies for that niche with my last company, but they're not the same buyer as my current company. So it actually wasn't as much of a help as you might think. And yeah, it literally almost all came from cold emails that I wrote.
Yeah. Um, who do you send the email to? Is it like, let's say the chief legal officer of DHL, and then now he become the chief AI officer, or like what's a don't say this exact name, but like say like the title, or like I guess like how do you even craft a code message to, like, I mean, what is your original outcome? Is it like, hey, we have this like we're building this product, can you give us some feedback, yada yada yada, and then let's hop on a 15 minutes call, or like and then here's my track record, I have sold 2 companies to blah blah, or what goes into the cold email that to be this effective?
Yeah. I mean, I think the kind of key learning for me, I would say, is that like in my case, it's very authentic. So if it's not authentic, you should pretend to be authentic, I think. And if you're authentic, then like what I've always approached this with is like, we actually don't want to sell anything that's not providing a ton of value. And ideally, like philosophically, whatever revenue we receive should actually be a small percentage of the value that we deliver to the customer. And so I think the way that I've always approached it is like, and to your point, like I'm sure this time around it was easier because of my track record. But with Text IQ, I had like a borderline failure of a startup before that, and it wasn't like this amazing track record at the point of starting Text IQ, right? So I would say it definitely helps to like highlight like some of the accolades, and like with Text IQ, my co-founder at the time had been one of the inventors of IBM Watson, was doing his PhD at Columbia while I was doing my JD MBA. So like some of the like Columbia University, IBM Watson, like kind of name dropping some things that are all legitimately probably credible and impressive to the group is always helpful. But then like the content of the email is exactly like you said, like it's a little bit like with fundraising, like one of the pieces of advice that I sort of give people.
I was gonna ask you about the fundraising too, so I prepared some question about fundraising.
Okay. Yeah, but just kind of draw a common theme, and then we can go deeper into either of them. Is I mean fundraising is sales, and sending cold emails is sales. I think a lot of things are sales, and my learning is like on the fundraising side, I sometimes tell people, if you ask for money, you're going to get advice, and if you ask for advice, you're going to get money. And so a lot of the like authenticity is like I legitimately, in both cases, was at the beginning of building something that we thought could be transformative, but we obviously don't know nearly as much as the buyer and the customer does about whether it actually would provide value. And so I think people can kind of just tell if you're like legitimately, I literally don't have anything to sell to you. I want to just like practically interview you to be able to figure out, like, to learn more about your pain points, and basically just like begin to try to wrap my head around whether or not this thing could ever add value. And if so, what would that need to look like? And so I think when you frame it along those lines, it's just very much like, okay, this person's credible. If I have any desire to like somewhat learn about AI, meet somebody interesting, and just get to talk about all my problems, like a lot of people like doing that, right? So that's kind of the spirit of it.
But I have so many questions around that too, since we're talking about the mom test, and then like pull out like a Stripe to be like charging immediately on the spot. How, like, at what point do you be like, hey, let's charge this? And then because also like you're building a platform, right? Like the thing is like the thing that frustrates me when if I work with a team, I'm like a solo founder, though I have like a small team that's like kind of like freelancer and stuff. But I feel like for the I think the major problem of like having a team is like everybody's going at a different speed, and then if you're building a product and that may take like 5 years or versus like 5 days, how do you kind of incentivize people to be like, let's go faster? And what kind of version of the product do you feel like you're comfortable with like sending to clients? And like, because like you can't sign like completely just like very raw version of the thing, because it's like you're telling the lawyers like they are diligent, you can't make mistake that's like, that will kill their career. So what's yeah, how do you kind of like manage the team to like make sure that you launch some sort of like legitimate product that like that's very differentiated from like ChatGPT? No offense to ChatGPT, or like no offense to you guys, like it's just literally like, I feel like a lot of people just use ChatGPT as an equivalent to, solve certain problems, but obviously not the actual lawyers, right? But like I'm just saying, like I guess like basically equivalent products. So how do you build like the initial version of the product, and like what, like how do you, at what point do you charge, like how much? Not like how much, but it's like it's a small amount compared to like they're usually paying, or like is more like a giant amount because you want to kind of like land them, like kind of like make them lock in, or how do you kind of like think about these stuff?
Yeah, definitely. So I think on the maybe on the pricing piece, I can just start there, and then I can dive into the other question about how do you navigate the product not being ready and getting it in front of a very discerning user, right? So I think on the pricing piece, I mean, I've always approached it as like we literally have a slide that I created that just shows our pricing principles, and I actually share it with the customer because what I found is that it's actually good to be transparent with them and ultimately tell them like they know that we're not running a charity, so this isn't like we expect to just do a ton of work and develop things and have no clarity on how we're gonna benefit from it. So I'm usually just very very open, and I say, look, we obviously, and like some of those principles are literally transparency, fairness, having our pricing be calibrated on the value that we deliver to a customer, and having a regular checkpoint around that. So if we're mutually hoping to drive $100 million in value that we can drive to this customer, then A, let's hold ourselves accountable to that outcome and measure that regularly. But B, if they're paying us $100,000 and we're driving 10 million instead of 1 million in value, then it's probably time for them to pay us more like 1 million, right? If that was kind of the construct. And so I think a lot of it is just kind of focusing more on not like acting like a vendor, right? But actually acting like a partner and somebody who is legitimately like thinking about it from their perspective, right? Because what does the customer have to do, right? They have to obviously make a business case, go get budget, figure out like how they justify this, where does the budget come from. So I've generally taken an approach of being like legitimately curious about how the buying process works on their end,
Mhm.
sharing with them our philosophy, which I think is very much like should be a no-brainer, or at least our goal is to make it a no-brainer for them, but we need their help to basically get the right way to price and package it to make it a no-brainer. And this is all like early days when you haven't figured out your pricing, I would say. And then I think on the product side, I mean, look, I think one benefit of our approach has been we really don't like we've been classified by all of our customers as what they call a single source supplier. So
Mhm.
they're not like, oh, we want you to do an RFP with Harvey Lagora and GCAI. They're
Mhm.
like, I'm sure those three do an RFP, and they're all like some version of ChatGPT for lawyers, right? And then
Mhm.
there's kind of like separately this Udia because we're not really a law firm either. So it's like, how do you think about the other companies out there that are saying we're going to drive $100 million in value by building and stitching together a data platform and deploying a lawyer to drive like $1 million in savings in your M&A deals or whatever it is. Like it's a very, very different value proposition. And so I think with that model, and especially where there's an opportunity to not only give them the SaaS tool to use themselves, but to also drive outputs and outcomes, it a little bit like changes the risk curve because what actually happens is like a lot of times our own team will be the user of our product, and they're obviously much more patient if it's like not perfect right away, but we kind of just have the lawyer in the loop or the kind of mechanism to make sure that maybe on day one we can only automate 30% of the tasks instead of 80%, and then the goal becomes automate 80% by the next three iterations of this, right?
Mhm.
Uh, but it kind of removes that dynamic if that makes sense.
I have another question on this. So, like, how do you know how much is their budget for something like AI? Because I don't think at the beginning at this stage, I don't think they're gonna be like, okay, we just don't hire like any legal general counsel whatsoever. Like, so I'm sure they have like an AI budget versus like, the lawyer budget. How much can you kind of like going into um yeah, how do you kind of like prove your result to like, you can say, hey, this averagely solve your, 40% of your like time, blah, blah. But like, I guess like, how do you kind of like frame the outcome to make sure that like everybody kind of like is on board with like spending more money on you?
Yeah, I mean, I just ask, right? Like it's I think a lot of maybe first time founders especially are like very shy about these things or they feel like uncomfortable, right? But at least with B2B, right? I mean, and honestly, I think across the board, it just makes life easier if you can just be very direct
Mhm.
and honest about these things. So I would just ask, and in some cases, they have a mandate internally and they have a budget. And I even ask like, hey, we know it's different in every company. If you have like, hey, as long as it's less than $75,000 for the pilot, I can sign off on this individually. Versus if it becomes $75,001, I have to get approvals from two other people. Like we just ask, like, what is the situation here? Because obviously we want to at least recoup some of the investment that we're making with you, but at the same time, we don't want to add like 6 weeks to the process if we can get a pilot done in the next 2 weeks. Like we're not in it for the pilot revenue; we're here for the long term relationship. So that's kind of the spirit of how I go about having those conversations.
Um, I want to go into the, I guess, like, uh, the other piece of it. So, like, one is like, um, I guess, like, what are, sorry, I'm like looking at my notes. My notes is like so shitty. Okay. Oh, yeah, fundraising. So, you raised like $106 million for the Series A. Um, I guess like I'm not gonna ask about why is there 6 million more than 100 million, but like I'm gonna ask about like what does a fundraising journey look like for you, and how do you kind of like set up the deadline for all these like investors, and like yeah, what's your approach for investors in general, and why is like I feel the legal space everybody's raising mega rounds. I mean, obviously you guys are one of the very standout ones, but like a lot of people are just you also raising 50 mil or whatever like, but compared to other startups, their Series A is like 10 million or something. Like not 10 million. That's like now very common these days in the AI era. 50 mil is maybe the average, but 100 mil is like double, right? So like, how do you kind of like to raise like these like mega rounds?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there is kind of a very common like misalignment of incentives that happens between the founders and the VCs, where in many cases the VC obviously it's all like the power law. They need like literally like one or two or three companies to return the whole fund, and that's kind of what they're constantly thinking about is which one has that potential and how do I triple down on that. And I think the uncomfortable truth is a lot of founders don't actually aren't going for the $1 trillion opportunity. Like they would be quite happy if they got $100 million exit, right? And it creates kind of a little bit of a problem in that, again, if the VC thinks you're going to be the next $100 billion company and you're happy with a $100 million company, sort of how do you navigate that? And candidly, I think like even myself looking back on it, like when you've been paying yourself like nothing for so many years, you're going through all this pain and suffering, you then kind of see that one of the big incumbent in the space raised, or a competitor raised a huge round. Like it is very hard, right? It's very, very hard to kind of like when your VC is some like wealthy person who's off and vacationing and having a good life for the most part. Like it's easy for them to say let's go for $1 trillion outcome, but as a founder who's actually going through a lot of pain and suffering, I think it can be, after like years and years especially, it can be like very, very tempting to just take a like life-changing exit for yourself and not necessarily give the VC the outcome that they were hoping for. I think for us, like we've now, all three founders are kind of at a point in their career where there's actually great alignment of incentives in that
You
we
already had so many. You actually had good outcome before, so now you're like shooting for IPO. So
yeah, exactly. And so I think that's like a big part of it is why are we raising so much? Well, this is a huge market and we don't see our market as legal. It's actually the $6 trillion of professional services, which kind of exists today and where none of it makes any sense anymore, honestly, from a business model standpoint. Like, why would you pay any of these firms, whether it's, again, consulting, law, accounting, investment
oh
banking?
yeah, I feel like nowadays like the so I've like seen so many founders that are trying to replace like BCG or like McKinsey or something. Like I feel like I heard that they are charging maybe like half mil or something for like a specific case. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like a PowerPoint. People like the founders are framing as a you're paying like 500K for like a PowerPoint. So like people are hating it, but I want to be mindful of time. Maybe we'll wrap with like a 2 question and then we'll do a 1 minute fire round. But okay, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, you're saying like it's kind of like
Yeah. Well, so I mean, look, to really convert knowledge work and services into software at scale, it is, and to do that in a way that's not just like we built a law firm that makes a lot of money, but actually we're building a data platform that plugs into their entire environment ecosystem and really is building this end-to-end data platform. It is just something that is like a much bigger investment, I would say, and a much bigger return on the investment than if we just build a ChatGPT wrapper. And I'm not at all diminishing the wrapper strategy. I think it's a great one and probably a much faster path to like very significant revenue. But the sustainability of that, I do question because I use ChatGPT and I love it. And for $20 a month, I'm getting something that's actually getting better every day. So, you know, if you want to go for the kind of like we're actually building a new system of labor or work for the Fortune 500 and really doing that with an AI first, tech first orientation, it is just like a little bit more of a capital intensive play, I would say.
for sure. Where do you splurge on, and then where do you spend the money? Like where do you like save the money? Is that like do you splurge on engineers? Like, just like go after like the machine learning engineer at all these like top research labs, or like what's a whole vibe?
Yeah, great question. You know, I think philosophically we are kind of seeing the same thing internally that we're seeing with our customers, which is like the top 1% is actually now worth a lot more, right? And it's worth like over investing in the best talent out there and maybe not worrying as much about just getting the middle level talent, right? And so I think that that's kind of where we overinvest is very similar to our philosophy with customers, where we have some of the best people out there. And it tends to be self-selecting where they're actually coming for the equity anyway because they can see that we're on a really good path, right? So I think that's kind of on the talent side. We actually have on some level overinvested in like real estate and office space. And so we have like a really nice office in Palo Alto where everyone comes in often 6 days a week. And I think that's actually something that like kind of happened by accident because we were first at this co-working space, but it wasn't like a WeWork. It was a super nice one. And they had free lunch and all these things. And I'm normally pretty frugal about this stuff, but just seeing how beneficial it was to not ever think about food, to have like some level of like, I'm actually working with these humans that I get to know and we're all on the same team and it's us against the world type of a thing. Like culturally has been really valuable. But yeah, those are probably 2 areas that we're over investing.
Totally. Okay, so maybe we do one more, like which is like the AI trends. So what do you think? Like maybe we can start from like the legal side to the AI side. Like what are some trends that you're seeing that you feel like it's gonna be huge in 2026?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the biggest one, and this is obviously like the bet that we're making, is like I think people haven't quite gotten out of the like frenzied I need to buy AI and I'm not really sure why, but I need to buy AI mode. And in legal, this is particularly prominent, but I'm sure it's true across the board because this industry went from like literally no lawyers ever adopting any technology to now like I have a mandate to like do an AI pilot of some kind because it's coming from the top down, right? And I think we're probably going to be another 6 months of that. And for all the like AI toys, it's a very good thing because now everyone has a budget for toys. They all want a toy. They're going to compare the red toy with the blue toy and decide which one they like better. My prediction is that like second half of this coming year, there's going to be a little bit of a come to Jesus moment where it doesn't matter if your toy is red or blue. Is it actually driving ROI? And if not, why are you paying $500 a month per user for this toy? Right? Like at some point, I think the ball needs to drop of what's actually happening here. Is it adding work? Is it removing work? Is it allowing me to scale without adding headcount? Am I still adding headcount? Is my outside counsel bill going up or down? Like people are going to start to get a lot more focused within legal, but I would argue across the industry on what is the actual outcome and ROI that's being generated here.
Why is okay, maybe I hope like I'm not getting canceled, but like why is Sequoia King made Harvey?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I don't know a ton about them. I think they seem to be doing a great job, and I think they definitely made a big splash by both getting OpenAI to invest early on, and then also getting some of the world's top law firms to sign up pretty early on. And these are very risk averse, conservative law firms. And this industry is one where, like, we're kind of seeing the same thing on the corporate side because we've landed these very iconic Fortune 200 companies. It's become a lot easier for us to get everyone else because we've already de-risked it. And I think Harvey benefited from a very similar thing on the law firm side, where most law firms look at their other law firms, and if it's good enough for Allen & Overy, which is like one of their first top law firms, it's probably good enough for them. So I think that's probably one big part of it. And frankly, I do just think it's like so obvious that legal is getting massively disrupted. Like almost every, even just like AI engineer, if you just like ask them, hey, just please pick like 3 industries that you think are going to get impacted, like they all go to legal because it's all literally just language generation and language analysis, right? So it is just like a very, very obvious fit with, I would say, exposure to automation by AI. And yeah, I think that's probably a big part of it is just timing. And it's not easy to sell to law firms. I think Harvey and Legora are doing a great job selling to law firms, and I'm kind of curious to watch how that race goes down to see which one wins the law firm market. They're definitely fighting for it.
Love that. Okay, so I want to wrap with a one minute fire round. What's your favorite book?
The Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle.
You know what? I'm on a philosophy track these days. I was like listening to Mark Aurelius. Yeah. It was actually, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of insightful. Like I don't understand how the stuff, but I'm like, okay, yeah, I feel like I'm like listening to music or something. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
One of my professors at Oxford, this guy, John Tassiolis.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Ooh, that's a good one. Probably Jimi Hendrix if he was still alive.
Where can we find you outside of work?
What or what? Sorry.
Where can we find you outside of work? This is the question that you also ask your guests too.
Yeah. Usually either outside somewhere. So surfing, hiking, somewhere kind of trying to just get away from screens.
Love that. Well, Omar, thank you so much for coming to the show today. It was such a fun conversation about everything legal and AI and legal AI.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
One sec. Also, shout out to Mohit for like commenting. I feel like everybody lurk, but I want to encourage the commenters. Let me end stream real quick. Thank you so much.